Good afternoon and welcome to today's presentation, Modern Digital Transformation Challenges in the Pursuit to be Data-Driven. The information presented by the expert is not to be used as legal advice and does not indicate a working relationship with the expert. All materials obtained from this presentation are merely for educational purposes and should not be used in a court of law since the expert's consent, i.e. a business relationship where she or he is hired for your particular case. In today's webinar, William will discuss introduction, cloud computing, compliance and regulations, and artificial intelligence. To give you a little background about our presenter, William McKnight is the president at McKnight Consulting Group, where he has 30 years of information management and DBMS experience. He is a frequent keynote speaker and trainer internationally. William is a former database engineer, Fortune 50 information technology executive, and Ernst Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist. Mr. McKnight focuses on delivering business value and solving business problems utilizing proven, streamlined approaches to information management. He has also written hundreds of articles, blogs, and white papers which have been in publication and has consulted with Pfizer, Verizon, and many other Global 1000 companies. Attendees who require passcode, the word for today is digital. During the Q&A session, we ask that you enter this passcode into the Q&A widget for CLE reporting purposes. The Q&A is located to the left of your screen. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must log onto your computer as yourself and stay for the full 60 minutes. You are also required to complete the survey at the end of the program. Please note that CLE credit cannot be given to those watching together on a single computer. Tomorrow morning, we will send out an email with a link to the archive recording of the webinar. The slides can be downloaded from the resource list located at the bottom of your screen. Thank you all for attending today, and William, the presentation is now turned over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Rochelle, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here with you, talking about something that I'm very passionate about, something that I enjoy, something I've spent my career in, and that is enterprise data. And specifically, I'm going to raise it up today a little bit and talk about modern digital transformation challenges. So what are enterprises going through out there? Why are they going through it? They're going through it largely in the pursuit to be data-driven. I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's something that many enterprises are using as kind of a guidepost for the big decisions that they make. Because, as I like to say, no matter what business you're in the business of data today. And enterprises are slowly but surely, I should say the pace has really picked up lately, but they're getting to know that they are in the business of data and they need to do a better job with their data. They need to get it into the right platforms internally in order to succeed. And they need to be able to utilize it by growing their data science. And so I'm going to be going over these concepts in this presentation. I want you to fully understand what is going on at a certain level, obviously, with enterprise technology. And a lot of it is about data. So I'll be talking about that. And here's a little bit of background. I think I've already been introduced, so I will move along here. Enterprises are in the business of data. So again, no matter what business you're in, and my consultancy serves communications firms, retail, manufacturing, a lot of financial, a lot of healthcare, also pharma, insurance. These are all big users of data. Information's exploding. There are studies that show that more information's been created this year than in all of humanity prior to this year. And a lot of that's because, obviously, of the digital transformation that our society has gone through, which gives us the opportunity to create so much more data, clickstream data, sensor-driven data. We can now store the full telecom record and so on, and not even blink. So the possibilities are there from the technology side to do a lot with data, a lot more than what we are doing. So I don't want to say we're at the tip of the iceberg, but we're not too far along in terms of the things that are going to change in business because of the availability of data. And indeed, I like to say that obviously we all know the the 500 largest companies in the U.S. that change S&P 500. It changes on a regular basis, and data is going to be the thing that's going to be a catalyst for that change in the next 5 to 10 years. And indeed, if companies do not reach a certain level of maturity with their data, they're not going to be able to survive, because it's just not simply good enough to execute everyday functions that they have been doing, like being the low price leader or having an efficient supply chain. You have to utilize your data, because business is real time all the time. Information is what differentiates us from our competitors. It's having the information available and using the information. Information quality impacts our clients, our associates, and our shareholders. Yes, all our counterparties in business now demand that we do a good job as a business with our data. It's used and reused. Information usage drives data value. Now, what we've moved into in the past few years is the era of big data. Big data is different from, I'll say, non-big data, in that the volume, the different data types that it has, it's all at a very different level. It's like sensor readouts of, say, your toll tag when you're going down the freeway and all those cars passing under the toll tag. It's just voluminous, and it's happening all the time. And all the things we're doing on our phones and so on. So this is all creating information at a much different volume than ever before. Information is used and reused. Yes, that information may not be, each piece of information may not be used as much as, say, your traditional, say, financial data that we've stored in relational databases and so on over the years, but it's still important. And those businesses that can exploit this level of big data are really going to be the ones that identify information as a key business asset and stand out. And there are initiatives underway to actually value an enterprise's data on their bottom line balance sheet. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how that plays out. But indeed, regardless of that, information is a key business asset. Now, I'm all about data maturity, and I have a maturity model, and I regularly assess enterprises in terms of how they're doing on their data maturity scale, because I get a question on a regular basis: how are we compared to our peers? How are we compared to others in the industry, and so on? Now, I don't think it's a great question, because I'd rather they ask about what they can achieve themselves from where they are, where can they go? How quickly can they get there? But nonetheless, this is a question. So I have reverse engineered my past 30 clients, and they've fallen into 5 different camps, as it turns out, with how they're using information. Now, I'm not going to dive into this too deeply, but there's many, many factors that go into whether you're a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And the orange line shows you where most companies are. Most companies are a 1. And then it goes down from there to where there's very few 5s. But there are 5s that exist, and they are dominating their industry. And I put a star around the 3 because this is my challenge to all companies out there. Get to a 3 as soon as possible. If it's 2021 before you get to what's a 3 today, you're probably out of business. I feel that strongly about it, and indeed, that is the sort of thing that's playing out there. So data maturity is on one axis, business success is on the other. Not meeting some book standard around how it should be, but business success. The data science pioneers out there are locking in today. It's today. They're letting the data speak. They're not using the old methods of sort of executive opinion. Use of statistical models, machine learning. I'll get into that in a little bit. Deep business implications to our work. They're letting the data speak and drive the business where it needs to go, whether it's something that they could think of on themselves or not. I'm not saying they're turning over their judgment to the computer. They're certainly not. That day will come, but for now, it's a nice blend of judgment as well as data. Data science pioneers are now dealing in algorithm management. So this is something fairly new, but most organizations are really becoming algorithm managers in that they're sharing algorithms, they're incubating algorithms, and they're putting algorithms through a machine learning operations process whereby they are idealized from a non-functional aspect, meaning they're recoverable, they're transparent, they pass their ethics standards, and so on. And by the way, let me take a quick aside and say that I would used to call this kind of presentation what's going on in IT today. But I stayed away from that because, in case you don't know, IT has become somewhat disintermediated, neutered a bit, you might say, central IT, that is, in most organizations because of the ubiquity of resources on the cloud. Many big initiatives fit into departmental budgets. So it's not that central IT isn't needed anymore, it's just that their roles have been sort of regulated down to a lower tier. Indeed, there are, I would say, pockets of IT everywhere. And it's the rare organization that can make that all work together harmoniously. And none of that is stopping organizations from moving forward with initiatives around data and technology. Okay, so you might have heard about data scientists. Yes, I would say probably 40–50% of organizations now have on staff a data scientist, and this is not a data analyst that has been around a while. It's actually a thing. It's a thing at a different level than a data analyst in terms of the depth to which they go. And they love data, and they use a different set of tools than the vast majority of pedestrian analysts and users, as we call them, in the enterprise. And I can get into that in a little bit. The first wave of data science leaders have emerged, and they are reaping the exponential benefits. So I always encourage my clients to get on board those things that you think are going to have some strong legs, because the early bird catches the worm. The early bird is going to get the majority of the benefits of that technology. And indeed, that's what's happening. That's what we're seeing. So with that as a background, let me get into 3 top trends in enterprise data environments. And I think these trends also give me the ability to say a lot more about, what's going on in the enterprise today. I want you to be very aware of what's going on in the enterprise. And a lot of it has to do with technology, obviously, and a lot of that technology has to do with data. And these enterprises are challenged by all of this. Believe me, they certainly are. First of all, sensible divisions of analytic platforms. Perhaps you've heard of some of these. And on the left-hand side of my axis, the axis here is data cultivation. That's the degree to which the data is prepared within this artifice, like the data warehouse. And the builders of the data warehouse, I'm showing here, they have to have a high understanding of how that data is going to be used. Yes, this is true. I'm sure you've heard of the data warehouse, and many organizations have one or multiple of these data warehouses. And they've been around for quite a while. Enterprises quickly, early on, I'd say 15 years ago, decided that or saw that they could be more efficient for all of these reporting needs if they didn't have every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the company building their own, if they didn't have every Tom, Dick, and Harry in the company pulling data from every source system and integrating it themselves in different ways to different standards, different rules, different governances, and so on. And that began the data warehouse era. And we're still in it, and they're still very important to every enterprise. However, most of them reside on relational databases, which are good for so-called structured data, alphanumeric type data, numbers and letters. And a lot of data today, not only is it at a volume that would make using the relational database rather cost prohibitive, but it also uses other data types than what we're used to. And in the lower left-hand corner, we see the emergence of something we call the data lake, which is really primarily today for that data scientist that I spoke of. And this is where an organization would put, quote unquote, all of their data. Now, obviously, nobody's achieved that, but the idea is the more the merrier. And the data lake is usually not going to be built on a relational database, like an Oracle or a DB2 or a SQL Server, some of the more popular ones there. A data lake is going to be put in what we call cloud storage, which is more kind of old-fashioned, non-frilly type of storage that just stores the data with a delimiter between the records. And yes, of course, there's some organization around it, but it can store the data rather cheaply. And indeed, there's a growing ecosystem of tools that can work with data like this. And in the middle, I show a data mart, which is kind of a loose term in our space. It's kind of bandied about just to describe something that's not quite a data warehouse or not quite a data lake, but something that's maybe has data pulled from one or the other of those things for a specific purpose. Most of the time, these data marts would have been better served just being part of the data warehouse, but that's now not how organizations operate. Again, back to the disintermediation of IT, and I would also add to that the disintermediation of standards and architecture. In an organization, data marts do proliferate. So we have all three of these are the major analytic platforms of the enterprise. And I do say analytic, and I'm making a distinction there from operational. So operations runs the business and analytics analyzes the business. So an operation might be when you're, I don't know, making an airline reservation, or maybe you're making a claim in healthcare, or you're at the POS register at Walmart or what have you. You know, those are operations. But that's different from analytics. That's why we have these other structures to pull the data out of operations and get them activated in a different way. Now, a major trend in business today is cloud. And companies are shifting their focus to or entertaining a notion for a first-time use of the cloud. Although I would say every organization is using a cloud. They may not acknowledge it or even realize it sometimes. But if you're using, for example, Salesforce.com, you know, that's in the cloud. If you're using Exchange or any of the other email systems, that's mostly in the cloud. But we're talking about real enterprise missions here, real big, important initiatives to the bottom line of the enterprise, such as the data warehouse, the data lake, and so on. Those are increasingly being provisioned in the cloud. Not as fast as they should be, in my opinion, but nonetheless, they are getting provisioned in the cloud. Spending on cloud-based big data analytics technology will grow much faster than spending for on-premises solutions. So it used to be, and it still is to some degree, but I tried to convince my clients to go to the cloud. But it's becoming more like my clients will ask me to help them with their already convinced minds that they need to be in the cloud. Now, I don't know if I get to it in the deck, but I'll mention that there are three major public clouds, and I'm distinguishing that from a private cloud, which is kind of a loose term. But a public cloud is, you've got your Amazon, of course, you've got Google, and you've got Microsoft, and they are the big three. IBM has a cloud, Oracle has a cloud, and various other vendors have their own cloud. But the real trend here is multi-cloud, or what we call hybrid cloud. Most organizations are hybrid cloud. They have a little of this, they have a little of that. Again, they're out of control in terms of not necessarily having central IT guiding them. So it's a loose federation of different departments for the most part. Now, the cloud is different from on-premises in many ways. And some organizations realize this when they make their move, and some don't. Some of these major differences are the software model is different. No longer are you buying software with a big, hefty upfront fee and paying 22% in maintenance. Now it's pay as you go, pay on a monthly basis, maybe even on an hourly basis. So you pay at that kind of a basis now. I want to put an asterisk here and say that, and I'll get to pricing a little bit more, but I do want to say that when it comes down to it, obviously these software vendors like to know that they have a revenue stream from you, so they'll give you incentives to commit, of course. But the idea is that you don't have to. You can buy by the hour. And it doesn't take the same level of expertise to set up one's own, or to set up the cloud, than it does to set up one's own data center. And so I haven't, and by the way, you might be thinking about staffing and so on, I haven't seen a lot of layoffs and things like that as a result of the cloud, or any of these things yet. It's probably coming, but so far, because we are dealing with a very important asset of the company, we're not seeing people that have these kinds of skills get laid off. Of course it happens, but not as much as you might think. So all these other things, I'm not going to belabor all of them, but all of these are different for the cloud than on-premises. And a lot of my consulting ends up being whatever's going to make it work, and that ends up being a lot of what we call organizational change management, to bring people along with the move to the cloud, because the cloud is scary for a lot of people. And if you think the cloud is scary, when I get to artificial intelligence, it's even scarier. But the cloud is scary because it does change jobs, and people are skeptical. And where do you think most of the skepticism for all this progress comes from? It comes from IT. It comes from the technology professionals in an organization, many of which who have been around a while, and they know how to do things the way they know how to do things, and change is difficult for them and others. But we try to bring people along with it, and we find most of the time, if given the chance, we can do that. It may take some time. There's obviously the first kind of resistance to it and so on, but we get there. Now, there's different things you can do in the cloud. You can put your test and development in the cloud, or you can put your production in the cloud, or both. You can put your disaster recovery in the cloud. I say, if you don't know what to do, how to get to the cloud, maybe the first easy thing to do, low-hanging fruit, might be to put your disaster recovery in the cloud, to which many clients will say, what disaster recovery environment? And so the cloud gives you an opportunity to get that up quickly. So that's nice. And let me go through a few things about the cloud. Now, you can put any software in the cloud. You can put your Microsoft Excel in the cloud, and we do that. But that's not the same as enterprise data that has been either what we call born in the cloud, so they have no on-premises possibilities whatsoever, or the technology has had major engineering done so that it can work for the cloud and give you all the benefits that you expect from the cloud, which are things like quick provisioning, rapid elasticity, so it'll grow just ahead of the need. You're not overspending for things you don't need, and you have access to a wide variety of resources. Indeed, all of the clouds give you options. There may be 10 or 20 options, really, for what we call nodes, which are basically computers. And the cloud structure is a bunch of these nodes working together. And so we are scaling the cloud, we call it scale out. We're scaling the cloud out by adding nodes, maybe hundreds or thousands of nodes, whereas before, when we were on premises primarily, we just made bigger machines. And we just kept adding, you might remember, we just kept adding CPU, kept adding storage, kept adding memory to the machine to keep up. Well, we keep up differently now. We just add more smaller machines that may have up to a terabyte of data, usually far less. So software comes with a wide array of integration with the cloud from a licensing perspective. You can buy the infrastructure. That's just pure bare metal. Do whatever you want with it. You can buy a platform, or you can buy full-on software like Salesforce that just works in the cloud. And heck, you don't even have to know it's in the cloud. Everything just works in the cloud. Platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, that's more of what somebody like me is going to get into. And they're going to use that as the foundation for building out the data warehouse, building out the data lake, building out the master data management hub, etc. in the cloud. And by the way, I have done, about 12 or some odd benchmarks of cloud cloud databases, cloud software in the past year, and these are all published. And so I have benchmarked Redshift, Snowflake, Microsoft, Teradata, Actian, Vertica, on. And they've been quite well received and quite interesting. So we put this software through the paces. It helps us when we get to a client. A couple pages here on understanding pricing, because I thought this might be something you would be interested in. It's not down to a science yet. Things still matter in terms of, what time of the month that you get the sales guy and, all that jazz that we've gone through for a long time. That's still there, but the pricing is a little bit different. So what I show you here is how Azure SQL Data Warehouse, now Azure is Microsoft Cloud, right? And SQL is structured query language, the language used against relational databases. And so Azure SQL Data Warehouse is one of their products. Infrastructure, well, I'll call it platform as a service that works in the cloud. You pay for compute resources as a function of time. The hourly rate for SQL Data Warehouse varies slightly by region. All of these cloud providers, now ultimately, there's a server there somewhere, right? The data doesn't exist in a literal cloud. It exists on a server farm somewhere. It's just that these providers, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, etc., they have provisioned their own data centers. I believe there's quite a few around me here in the Dallas area. But anyway, you just sort of rent your space in there. You don't ever go touch your machine or get acquainted with your machine in other ways. It's just there doing its job. And there's a charge for compute and a charge for storage. And that's what I want you to remember, that can be different. Storage is far cheaper, but you pay for each individually. And this is a big advantage of the cloud because some workloads require more or less compute versus storage. And so this is one of the things that we turn to the cloud for. Now, I won't belabor how Amazon Redshift does it, and next slide, how Snowflake does it, except I do want to say that Snowflake is unique in that they have different levels of enterprise features that you can buy, obviously at different levels. And Google BigQuery is their database, their analytic database on their cloud, which is the Google Cloud Platform. And here are some links to where you might find some of the pricing. Now, another thing that's going to be unique about the cloud, and I hear this a lot, especially when a company is getting into the cloud, is stuff about uptime and recovery and what's my recourse if we have any outage or credit for downtime. Now this, what I show you on the post here is the famous Amazon Web Services recovery from outage commitment to you. And so blah, 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 you can read the numbers, you might get some money back. I know of nobody that has done this. As a matter of fact, none of my clients have ever had an outage with AWS or any of them. Now, I know it makes the news when it does happen, and maybe it's just coincidence, but it's really not a very common occurrence. As a matter of fact, the conversation that I have on a regular basis with clients is, it's probably better than what you would do on your own. Not only the uptime, but also the security, which is obviously very important. Nobody wants a breach. That gets into the millions of dollars really in lost revenue and so on. We all know about this. We don't want this. And organizations are increasingly making commitments to things that prevent such things from happening. Still happens, obviously. But I think it's less likely to happen if it's in the cloud, where you have teams of professionals that are dedicated to this on a regular basis, doing it for the data center. Obviously, it's a big data center, versus doing it on your own. And wow, you'd really better have some serious credentials around security to keep ahead of that game today. Now, another thing that we're dealing with a lot is safe harbor and cross-border restrictions, so-called, compliance regulations. As a matter of fact, compliance regulations have been kicking off a lot of our projects because companies are concerned about it. Things like GDPR, which I'm sure you've heard of. And this is, in regards to the rights of EU citizens over their data use by companies. Now, just today, I was having a conversation this morning with a client in California where they have CCPA, right? California Consumer Protection. And this is like GDPR Junior. It's not nearly as prohibitive as GDPR, but it's a start. And I don't know if it's a bellwether for what's to come, but that's certainly going to create a lot of audits and fines and so forth. GDPR has already done this, and the biggest company that's gotten fined, or the most fines, is Google. What do you know? Moving on, security and privacy are the largest areas of concern today with the cloud. I mentioned that. Every company still needs to take an active hand in the security, even though they go to the cloud. Just going to the cloud is not good enough. All right. This brings me to our first pause in the action for any Q&A that you might have for me till now.
Thank you, William. If all the attendees can enter in the passcode for today, which is digital, and any questions that you have. Our first question, what is data really? What does it consist of?
What's that second word, Rochelle? Data what?
What is data? What does it consist of?
Oh, okay. Okay. So, yeah, data consists of every piece of, I don't want to say data in the definition, but every piece of information that is created anywhere, in any way, shape, or form in the enterprise. So when you are, I don't know, when you're a new employee and you fill out your application form, you're putting in your name, address, city, state, zip, all this sort of thing. That's data, all right? That's the start of your data journey, I guess, with this company as an employee. But a customer, when you take on a customer, let's say you're a retailer, when you take on a customer, you get all kinds of information on them. You get all kinds of information on products. You might be surprised the number of attributes that we have on products in retail. It gets into the many hundreds. Gets into the color of the product, the color of the packaging, the size of the sticker on the product, and on and on and on. Of course, there's many fields that have to do with pricing and this sort of thing, and where the ideal placement is on the shelf or on the online store, et cetera, et cetera. All of this is data. When you are creating data right now, when you move your mouse, when you click on something, you're creating data. As a matter of fact, one thing I heard a couple weeks ago and I happen to agree with is if you really want to get to know a person, the thing to look at is their clickstream. That's how you can really get to know a person anymore. So there's a big clamor to get their, enterprises to get their hands on that. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more when we get to artificial intelligence. But, data is any form of number or letter or picture or audio file or anything like that that gets created. Next
question. What do you do in the healthcare space? Any tips, or will that be discussed later?
What do I do? Okay, healthcare. Healthcare is a big user of data management, the things we're talking about here today. So they process claims, obviously, but one of the things that they're looking at today in a big way is they're trying to understand what the best care is, what the best care pattern is for a given something that somebody would come into the hospital, come to a doctor for. And how can they do that? Well, they can look across the whole concept at the hundreds, maybe thousands of care patterns that have been provided and pick out, well, what's working, and how do they know what's working? Well, people come back when things aren't working. So repeat visits are most likely a negative, and things like that. I've been involved in many of these. And so there's a lot of, trying to get the best care out there. There's also data involved in the selling, the packaging, as these companies like, Anthem, WellPoint, what have you, are trying, United Healthcare. United Healthcare was a big customer of ours for a couple of years, so we really did work on their data program. But we're talking about, creating packages where they can sell their data to companies in terms of, look how great our reporting is going to be. You're going to be able to see, what your employees are doing, and how, we're going to be very careful with the care that we give them because we have this artificial intelligence going on our concept. We're going to be very efficient about it, get them back to work, get them healthy, get them happy. We're that kind of company. And another thing I'll just mention quickly here about healthcare is when dealing with Medicare, those are big departments in these companies because there's a lot of regulations about that stuff.
Next question. I heard with the cloud that you have to be certain who owns the data, i.e. having a key. Would you kindly explain what this all means?
Did you say, Rochelle, did you say having a key, like K-E-Y?
K-E-Y, yes.
Having a key. I'm not sure what that means unless they're talking about the whole notion of security with a public and private key where you have to enter that to, cross-secure your data that might be in the cloud. But otherwise, I'm not really familiar with what that question is.
Okay. Next question. Are we going to be discussing this recoverability issues? If not, would you be able to speak about that?
Recoverability as in, getting your money out of these cloud providers if they were to have downtime? No, I wasn't going to discuss that anymore. But on any of these topics, if you want to go into more, just get a hold of me.
Thanks, William. You can continue with the presentation.
Okay. Well, next topic is regulations. What do you know? GDPR, let's go into that a little bit more. I said I wasn't, but here it is. I thought this might be interesting to you all. So it's general data privacy regulation, has to do with European citizens, and it's a regulation that's in effect. And by the way, even though there is Brexit, the UK is going to continue to adhere to GDPR, at least last word was, that can change. But this has been now enforced since May 25th of last year. The regulators were slow to jump in on this by design, I'm sure, but now they are. And now billions of dollars of, I should say euros, of fines have been doled out. And I mentioned that Google got the largest share of that. Actually, I think it's like 50% of it. But anyway, it requires organizations to understand what EU citizen, PII, that's person identifiable information. By the way, that's a huge concept in enterprise data. What do they have and how are they using it? They have to know where all of it is. So what's PII? PII is any two pieces of information that put together you could identify a person, like a last name and phone number, or social security number and address, things like this. So we have to know where that stuff is now inside our organizations. So organizations have now begun to budget for GDPR. I shouldn't say now, it's been a couple of years, but frankly, some organizations ignored it, or they couldn't get around to it because they're just simply are not agile enough to respond to things like this, which is obviously to their great detriment now and for their future business prospects. But that's another story. Budgeting for GDPR will depend upon the amount of PII data you have collected, the size of your company, and the maturity of your data governance program. So data governance, you should be familiar with this. This is kind of an overarching concept within these enterprises that has to do with data quality and how data should be represented in all of its various forms in the enterprise. So what the rules are that should go into that. Like, for example, customer lifetime value. You probably heard of that. That's, a barometer for how customers or companies are going to treat you, right? The higher your lifetime value potential, the more they don't want to lose you, right? But how do you calculate that? What's a good way to do it? Is it potential profits over the next 3 to 5 years? Does it have anything to do with historical value? Or does that just go into the calculation for their future value? There's a lot that goes into it. But companies are now expected to spend several $1 million or euros, as the case may be, on GDPR every year for the foreseeable future. And you're not immune to this if you're in the U.S. or anywhere outside of the EU, because if you have EU citizen data, you have to adhere to GDPR. So GDPR affects the UK, as I mentioned, who's still in the EU through, actually I don't know what the latest date is, but whose government has indicated that something like GDPR will continue. GDPR provisions also include US-based companies who do business in the EU. These are the provisions of GDPR. I won't belabor them. I don't know how interesting this is, but these are the major provisions that you need to know if you're thinking about GDPR. And I'll pick on a few of these. EU citizens have the right to be forgotten. So if an EU citizen did business with a company and they're not doing business with that company any longer, and this is a big and, the company has no business reason to keep their data, as in analytics, which they usually do, but they can homogenize your information off of their data. EU citizens have that right to ask that the company forget them. Don't contact me again, and don't use my information. So that's pretty interesting. And at a certain level of organization, they have to appoint a data protection officer now. Yes. And this is all fuzzy, by the way. It's all getting played out as we speak. But that's this last bullet, for example. Allow individuals to see their own data and data portability. Well, what does that mean? They were intentionally vague, and they're just going to let the market figure this out, let the courts figure it out, and there you go. So what can we do about this? And really, what can we do about data security? We can encrypt data as it's resting. As it's resting in our databases, it can be encrypted. And this has become more common than not to encrypt data, especially just because you're working on an environment. Let's say I'm building a supply chain system for a company. I don't need to see detailed consumer information, even though it might be part of the entire system. I can see scrubbed up data. So you have to get good at scrubbing data, and especially in development and test, in order to be effective with data security today. Now, I mentioned data governance. We do consulting in data governance. We do it even if we're there to do something else, like a data warehouse or a data lake or whatnot. We do consulting in data governance because it's important to all of those initiatives to get the right corporate definitions over the data that we store and make available. And so to do this, we do things like creating a data glossary, the data governance program. By virtue of knowing where the data is in the organization, is in a great position to facilitate the data security protocols of the organization. Who gets to see what, when, where, and how. Yeah, data architecture. So this is another big topic that has to do with regulations and everything else. As a matter of fact, if I had to pick on one thing around, for my whole career, what I focused on, it's data architecture. It's which data is going to go where in the organization, how's it all going to work together, how are we going to secure it, how are we going to use it. But, back to the EU stuff, if you're a US-based company with EU operations, you will have to consider whether to apply the data protection standards to all data or just EU data. But you've got to apply it to EU data. You may have to wall off EU data from US systems if you can't vouch that the US systems will handle the data appropriately. So I have advised clients to, number one, treat all data with the level of care of GDPR. In certain cases, and in certain cases of more expediency, more chaotic kinds of environments, it's been more, okay, let's just meet the standard of GDPR for EU data, and then we'll go from there. So now I'm going to transition to my last topic for you, which is a big one, artificial intelligence. Data's new highest use in an enterprise will be training AI algorithms. AI is disruptive, and data is the foundation. These enterprises are not going to be able to get into artificial intelligence, which they really need to get into today They're not going to be able to do it if their data is a chaotic mess. They have to get the data governance in order. They have to get the data architecture in order. They have to know where their data is. It has to be secure. They have to be able to trust the data. They have to be capturing all the data, because the more the merrier when it comes to these algorithms. And these algorithms are trained by data. And so we have to have the data to give it. So let me set the context a little bit. AI is a broad concept. It has to do with smart machines. There's applied to a specific situation. There's general, where we're going to allow the computer to do the thinking for us because it's better than us at that thinking. There is a thought pattern emerging that in the future AI will be a better CEO than a human for enterprises. So we'll see that play out. Can't belabor that today, but machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, and it's the biggest subset. And this is where the machine, well, it learns. It learns by example. It learns by giving it a bunch of data, for example, and saying, well, this is a set of data that ended in a positive result for us as a company. This is a set of data that ended in a negative result for us as a company. And I'm oversimplifying here. But anyway, artificial intelligence can look at patterns in those two kinds of data, and then when you give it another record, it can say, oh, this looks like it's going to be something that's going to result in a positive value for the company, and this looks like something that's going to be a negative. And of course, you don't just want to know that something's a negative. You want to know what can you do to make it into a positive, you see. And this is where companies are going to differentiate themselves. Are they going to be able to turn that understanding into a positive action for the company? Are they going to be able to change behavior by, for example, giving you a very, private advertisement that would really work for you, as opposed to a general advertisement? So anyway, there's all these concepts in machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, a set of advanced algorithms that almost simulates a human behavior. Machine learning is a term that's thrown around quite a bit, and sometimes it just makes the whole thing confusing. So you have to be aware. And the other big subset of artificial intelligence, by the way, is natural language processing. Yeah, another field of artificial intelligence. This is where this is like your Siri, where it can hear language and know what to do because it understands. Well, I shouldn't say understand. That's a loaded term. But it knows what to do with data that it hears. And it can turn around and talk back to you by generating language. And then there's the last step, which is actually, forming the sounds. But figuring out what to say is really the difficult part of natural language processing. Actually, I should say the most difficult part is understanding. And I gave a whole webinar on this, I guess it was last month. It's a fun topic, but there's a lot of weirdness in the English language that makes natural language processing hard. But consider this as we go forward. Robots can now read better than humans, putting millions of jobs at risk. Yeah, they can read better. They can certainly drive better. And, what else they can do better remains to be seen. But it's going to be a lot. Yeah, it's going to be a lot. Oh, and guess what else? Google's new AI designs AI better than humans could. So we don't even need to design AI. It can do it itself. So this is kind of crazy thinking. I mean, if you get into this in deep, I think this is going to really, really change life over the next decade. And we're going to be looking at some drastic differences because of the possibilities of AI. Some good, some bad, but we've never held back, have we? If you look back in time, there's always that initial resistance, which is kind of what we're going through now, but then there's that mass acceptance. Take driverless cars, for example. They will push on. They will push through. And I know that every time they run somebody over, it's tragic, of course, but it's far less on a percentage basis than a human driver. So there's going to be reasons why that's going to push on. And next slide, I have the pattern that an enterprise goes through for artificial intelligence. I'm going to pick up the pace just a little bit here. I don't know if you care about the details here, but my point here is that a lot of it has to do with data, compiling data, labeling data. So you better have your data act together if you want to get into artificial intelligence. AI data is all data of the enterprise. Here's a list of some data we've compiled for enterprises. The question earlier was, what is data? What's data all about? Well, here's a list. Call center recordings and chat logs, streaming sensor data, like readouts. It's also amazing what these sensors can read out. Not only temperature and location, but air pressure and all sorts of things that are very interesting. Email response metric, blah, 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 blah. YouTube video has added so much volume to data that we're storing. Here's some business use case examples. So marketing, segmentation analysis, and campaign effectiveness. All of these that you see here are dramatically undergirded now by artificial intelligence. And to break this down a little bit, I have some enterprise data domains on the right. Yes, enterprise data is broken down by domain. So you have customer data, employee data, partner data, and so on, right? Well, there are different experts, there's different governance levels over each of these in an enterprise that's working effectively. And you could probably take an hour, and I could probably take an hour and sit here and take each one of these business use cases and cross-reference it to the enterprise data domains that it needs in order to be successful. So this is where we get into get your data act together. Here's some machine learning. Well, again, a big part of artificial intelligence. So if you're not down with the nuance, fine. Think of it as artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence in action in the enterprise, improving financial fraud detection and reducing costly false positives, etc., improving call center experiences with chatbots. And we've all experienced the chatbot, for better or for worse. Enhanced in-car navigation, blah, blah, blah. So you see there's a lot going on. This is just the tip of the iceberg here. There are some pioneers of artificial intelligence across the bottom of this slide. Machine learning, there's supervised learning where you give it data and you give it a label. Like I said before, this was a positive action, this was a negative action. That might be more conceptually doable for you, but then there's unsupervised learning where the data is not even labeled. And then there's reinforcement learning, which can be part of the other two, which is when you're giving feedback to the machine. So you're becoming part of a human, is becoming part of that ecosystem. These are the machine learning algorithms, the main ones, I'll say. And no, we won't go through each one of them today. And yes, it's a ton of math, and it gets very detailed and takes a while to understand what's going on here. But there are algorithms here that do things like find out the most important nodes in the network. And I don't mean nodes as in computers. I mean, I might mean people in your employee base or people in your customer base, and for various things. And one of the things we can get our arms around the most probably is the regression algorithms, by effectively looking at the past, predicting the future. Yes, this is going to cause a disruption in jobs. These are some of the jobs that are going to be disrupted in the next decade as a result of artificial intelligence. Drivers, printers, publishers, cashiers, we're seeing the cashier less, retailers emerging now, insurance adjusting. Just take a picture. We're not going to send an adjuster out. We can analyze that picture with our AI and really determine whether we're going to fight it, what we're going to pay, etc. Recruiters, obviously, radiologists, because they use their eyeballs to look at things and make determinations. We can get that reverse engineered and into artificial intelligence, and so on and so forth. It's going to be major disruption. These are some jobs that will thrive. As a matter of fact, right now, because of artificial intelligence, we are in a net add of jobs to the economy. That will change, I'm pretty sure, but these are some jobs that will thrive. Robotics, big data, artificial intelligence, esports. Yes, a DNA scientist. Boy, we could spend some time there. As a matter of fact, I'll hold on that for a couple slides, but there's a whole new world opening up to us in terms of DNA. ethics is very important, and I encourage clients to undertake a code of ethics when they're stepping into artificial intelligence. Elon Musk famously said AI is our biggest threat, and you can read into that what you need. But what about machine learning that's manning weapon systems and determining when to fire? What about bias that might get into our algorithms because we've overweighted a certain, I don't know, say racial person or gender or something like this? And there are reasons why we might prefer to take business action that supports the laws of the land, not just what's effective, because that's what the data is saying. So we have to be careful. And by the way, another thing we do is generate training data, and sometimes we don't have enough data to really train the algorithm, so many companies are generating their own training data, which is not real data. And it's kind of beyond me how this works, because that would seem to be kind of cheating the process here, or jump-starting the process maybe to an artificial degree. Anyway, on and on. Has a lot to do with, we're learning so much about DNA and how that can be spliced, and what we can do to babies and so on, and does AI have rights? Yeah, all this we're getting into. And then a new data set is our biodata, which we're starting to willingly give up in exchange for different things that companies can provide to us. But inherent within that DNA is our very next best move. In other words, what exactly we will do, how exactly we will respond to every situation is in that data. Forget analytics of analyzing the past. If you can get that data, you're going to be far ahead of the game, and that is going to be something that gets played out here in the next decade. So this has been my second part here, Modern Digital Transformation Challenges. You can track me at my Twitter. There's my website and phone number, and we have a little time for some remaining Q&A.
Thank you, William. If all the attendees can enter in the passcode for today, which is digital, and any questions that you may have. Our first question is, they're not sure if you answered the question on who owns the data once it's in the cloud. There are a number of notices on cloud sites that once the data is on their system, the company now owns it. Is this correct?
Oh boy, yeah, that's an area of major consternation right now. I'm glad you pointed that out. Who owns the data? What does it mean to own data? Does that mean you can do with it whatever you want within the law? There have been some cloud providers that have, I don't want to say snuck in, but they have certain, I think it's kind of covering themselves kinds of provisions just in case the data gets used or they find a use for it in the future or whatnot. But they do say that they now own the data. Yes, it's true. Now, I think what's happening is this sort of thing is getting smoked out and not becoming part of future contracts. But I'm not 100% sure about that. That's going to be a big area for to be worked on in the next few years, because who owns the data? Are companies giving up their ownership of that data? Don't they need the counterparty to adhere to the same provisions that you set up with your customer or wherever the data comes from? Yeah, probably so. So I haven't had big personal experiences with that going south for an enterprise, but nonetheless, that is being talked about. Yep.
And our last question. What corporations are leading the way into the next decade of data management, and what makes them different?
Ooh. Do you mean vendors, or do you mean end clients that are using this data out there in the marketplace? I'm going to go ahead, because it's not interactive, I'm going to go ahead and think that the questioner might be talking about the vendors. And so I would say on the vendor side, Amazon is a leader. Surprise, surprise. Google is a leader, especially around data science. They're going to be a survivor, and I think Microsoft is as well. I think it's no coincidence that I picked on the three that have the most major public clouds, because I think that showed a lot of foresight that I think has a knock-on effect in their entire organization and their entire product set. So, and I'm working with Microsoft now, and I'm learning about what they're doing with AI and what their future plans are. And I must say, I'm impressed. And I think it's not only consumable by an enterprise, but it's very progressive in terms of where it will start to take enterprises. So those are three that I think about, initially, and then there are pockets. Obviously, a lot of the innovation still happens in startups and gets purchased, so we can get into companies like ThoughtSpot, that's doing some very innovative things with interactivity with data, with natural language processing, and probably about 10 others, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, William. Please remember that if you are applying for CLE credit, you must have attended for the full 60 minutes of this presentation. You are also required to complete the survey at the end of the program. Please note that you will be receiving your certificates via email in 24 to 48 hours. I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending, and most especially William McKnight for his time and effort in creating this presentation. If you would like to speak with William, or if you would like to speak with a TASA representative regarding an expert witness for a case that you are working on, please contact TASA at 1-800-523-2319. One of my colleagues will be following up with you regarding your feedback on today's presentation. Again, thank you all for attending. This concludes our program for today.